post a link to this About Digital Services forum. This has everything that we use to get our content out there. So there's this Zoom meeting that you guys are on now. So you found that link already. There's also a homepage, and this homepage is on the community. That's where we share all the content. So if you want to go and find a deck that we use because you like a slide or two, or some old code, or a link to some demo inside of our instance, that'll all be, you'll be able to get to all that from the forum homepage. There's also a YouTube playlist. That's where we keep the videos. So there's kind of a reference back to the YouTube playlist onto each of the different blog posts on the community for each of these meetings, so that we have a little bit of the content and have it all together with the video and the content that was shared during that meeting. And then there's also a shared instance that we have. And sometimes people like to do demos on that shared instance. So anybody who sends me an email, I eventually get you an admin account on that instance. I think last count, we had about 160 admins on that instance. It gets a little sluggish at times, but it gets the job done. And it has a lot of our content on that was developed for these meetings. Okay, so like I said, I'll post this link that'll get you to this page. And if that's the one link you remember from the Digital Services Forum, it has a reference to all the things that you need to get to for any of the content that you'll see. A little bit about why we created this group. We created the group originally because a lot of people were just confused about the CMDB. As we moved on, we learned more and more about the CMDB. The people were trying to do a CMDB, they were trying to do digital transformation and use the CMDB as a launch pad for that. So we switched over to really focusing on digital transformation, and more specifically to enable the members that come and join us to be part of their own digital transformation. We share all the work we can. So we have discussions like we'll be having today. There's papers, there's that shared instance that we put code on whenever we can, or configurations, it's not always code. And make that available so that people aren't doing the same things over and over and over again. The group that I'm in is the Enterprise Architect group with ServiceNow, and we're the ones that host these meetings. So there's always one of us on, even if it's just like kicking it off like I am today, but also Arun is on our team as well. So he'll be our speaker today. And the structure, what we've been doing for the last 5 years, actually since 2018, are these bi-weekly calls. This is the main way that we get information out, but there's also other things we've done like workshops and things like that along the way. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, like I said, it's going to pretty typical case study format that Arun's going to take us through today, where he's going to talk about the current state. He's going to talk about how they redesigned that current state, and then how specifically how they standardized within that design. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. But if there's things along the way that come up in chat, so things that you might post, I might just stop Arun if there's something in context where we can do it there. So we might interrupt and bring questions up along the way. You don't have to wait till the end, but definitely get your questions as we're going into chat. All right, just a little bit of a setup before I hand it off to Arun. We always tie back what we're doing, almost every single meeting, to the common service data model in some way. And just to make everybody familiar real quick, I always use this intro where there's 4 domains of the common service data model. The design domain is when people decide what they need. They need a capability, and that helps them decide what to buy, what applications, what platforms to buy. Before they can use that, could get any value from it, they need to hand it to a build team. And the build team are the ones that configure it or write some code to make it work for their organization. But that build team cannot operate without the operations team. So the operations team is down in the orange here. These are all the people that turn that application on, that make it available for the organization. And then only then can you deliver back into the domain where we're giving people what they want, right? We're giving them digital services in some form, whether it's at the business consumer side or the technology consumer side for more of a technical portfolio. Okay, so that's what we're doing today. We're really focused on this area. So Arun will spend all the time down here. We don't jump around in the other areas that much. And more specifically, he's going to be talking about the requests, right? The request parts that come out. But just keep in mind, these requests are typically going to be connected to a business service that has a service level commitment, right? So a lot of these work hand in hand. The catalog requests that we'll see going out work hand in hand with those business service offerings that we love to talk about so much. And that's a quick intro. So with that, I'll welcome Arun. I'll let you do more of a formal introduction. Introduction of yourself, Arun, and take over screen share.
John, I think we lost
Arun,
you.
do you have the share button? Yeah, do you have,
yes,
do you have the share button?
I am going to share. Yes, I do. I'm going to share now.
Excellent.
Hopefully we can get this thing up. I'm going to share first and then. Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Looks good.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, John. That was a very good setup and intro and leading into most of the meat of my presentation here. But before I start, a quick intro about myself. Like John mentioned, I am a peer of his, and we are colleagues. Get some opportunities to work together. And I personally work mostly in the federal space, but I do have background in healthcare and other parts, of the other domains. Typically we all come from different domain backgrounds and also some roles that we have played. And I've been in ServiceNow like 2 years and 3 months now, but I have been in the ServiceNow ecosystem for more than 11 years. And in that, I've kind of been a platform owner, also VP of digital solutions, where you have the challenges of doing more with less, you're part of some digital transformation, which I think most of you are interested in, and which is what I was a part of. But prior to that, I was an implementation partner of ServiceNow. So bringing all these together, what I'm trying to do here is to bring a specific experience that I've been through and which I've seen a lot of customers kind of facing the similar scenarios and challenges and prioritization. So I thought, hey, why not kind of use this case study as an example to highlight some of these things. So I just want to set the stage that this is a conceptual presentation of an implementation. And it's about an approach, and it's not based on a specific version of ServiceNow, not some specific new functionality, etc. Things that have existed on the platform for a while now. And it discusses the original implementation was classic workflows, but there's no reason why it cannot be implemented in Flow Designer. And I'm not going to go into code, and we have limited time here, so I want to kind of give the gist of what really we faced and how we went about it, and what benefits kind of we derived from that, right? And obviously, I have no qualms and no delusions that this is like a perfect thing. There's always things that can be done to improve this, and I'm not really even talking about the full implementation, because I want to kind of give you the core of the implementation and the architecture, and then you can see where some of the other parts can be improved upon. I do want to call out my former colleague and who's still kind of managing this environment. And Prashant, if you can just identify yourself, I might reach out to him for some more technical depth, because he's the senior software engineering manager at the customer. Prashant, can you just say hi off video, so if you and so people will know that you're here and you'll help me with questions.
Yeah, hi Arun. This is Prashant Gadgir from Magellan Healthcare. So I'm the ServiceNow platform owner at Magellan, looking at the platform, all the enhancements and different modules for my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. And based on how we position this thing, Prashant is here in a personal capacity, but he's willing to share all his knowledge about the platform and how it is working, and it continues to work in this way, right? So going further in, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I've used that metaphor a little extendedly, but here's the background that we were in, right? So we had a business critical ticketing system that was implemented across 3 business lines, lines of business. And there was a 4th shared service organization. So you had 4 different major business units that were the customers of this service catalog. And these services included both IT and business requests. And there was a need to migrate from a legacy on-prem ticketing system to ServiceNow. And I specifically call out that as a ticketing system to ServiceNow because it was primarily a ticketing system. It was not the platform that ServiceNow pretends to be, portrays to be, but it was a ticketing system. And there was an end of support for the legacy system, causing immovable deadlines. So with that, since ServiceNow was already in-house and it was not yet being used for service catalog, it was being used for major incidents, P1 incidents, and some parts of the operations, IT operations management in terms of events and service mapping and things like that. So the platform was already in place, but we needed to move the services from the old legacy system to the new one. And with this, we kind of saw that there were around 350 services to be migrated, around 16,000 end users, both employees and contractors, around 450 fulfillers in various different areas of the organization. And the organization was undergoing exponential transformation. So I'll take just a couple of minutes here to call out and give attribution where it needs to be given. Is Exponential Transformation is a book that was written by Yuri Van Gies and Salim Ismail, and it's a whole approach to transforming organizations. But the CIO had specifically taken that to do the exponential IT transformation. So only IT, but it also kind of started seeping into the areas of the business. So, other than the actual approach to exponential transformation, it was the cloud first, SaaS preferred, mobile first, buy and integrate, all of these things that you typically hear about. And this happened circa 2016, right? So that's when it all started. So there was quite a lot of change going on in the way things were done, in the way processes were being approached. And we were doing things like value stream analysis, and we were looking at every process whenever it was identified for the transformation. So with all of this churn and things happening, we had also a workforce that needed to be transformed at the same time. So we were trying to do all of these things together. So these, I'm just trying to set the stage saying, this is the kind of environment we were in. And one of the approaches that we were also thinking about was, hey, why not we delegate the deployment? This is long before the low code, no code was considered as a buzzword. We were thinking we should delegate it, increase the resources available so we can get these things done faster. So we had a federated approach that we were trying to train people on ServiceNow workflows and catalogs, and all of that was going on at the same time. So we were trying to modernize. But here is what we found, right? In terms of the requests that we had. And the requests that we had were, we said they're all following a typical request approval task fulfillment kind of flow. And when we started analyzing the 350 different services, there was request, one approval, one task, close, or request, one approval, task one, task two, close. So you see the different types of request patterns that we observed within the set of 350 services. But some of them were really one-offs, so they didn't fall very cleanly along these lines, and they needed to be addressed specifically.
Hey,
We
Arun,
also- Go ahead.
every one of those 350 had their own,
Yeah.
their own request type.
Yeah, so it was a different kind of technology where it was like a form based, and you had to define each one, and it was not tied into. I mean, you could not abstract out the workflow. You had to kind of specify it in each one of the items specifically, right?
Got it.
So that was one of the other challenges. So we said we cannot take that approach because we didn't want to make it a maintenance nightmare and having so many workflows and for different items, and incur that expense. The end users, the requesters, typically requested multiple items at the same time. That's the other thing that was happening, but that was happening outside the system, because inside the system there was no way to bundle everything, right? And then there were requesters that were requesting items both for themselves and on behalf of the others. Your typical case in point is your manager requesting for an onboarding new hire, right? So those kind of things were happening. And here's some things that we noticed from the analysis of the current state was that almost all the items are approved. And those that were rejected or canceled were because the requester made an error or did not need the item, right? So the approvals were becoming huge bottlenecks, and was adding an overhead on the SLAs. So I just want to pause here and see if this is kind of something that any of you in the audience have observed in your own environments, that the approvals become the bottlenecks, and that kind of hits on the SLAs, and mostly everything is approved. Any thoughts, any comments in the audience?
Got some definitely in there. Yes, we have the same bottleneck. Yes, 100% accurate. So it sounds like you're hitting the mark.
Okay, thank you. So I think something that
I just
came
want
out.
to comment, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
from research in the industry that backs up that it's either number one or number two reason for breached SLAs, so yeah, bottlenecks. The less approvals you need, the better. So
Right. Okay, so you'll see that I'm just setting up on the theme that I'm going to follow through here, right? But there are some other things that we found. We found that there are common groups of request items. Like somebody comes in and we were already doing things like, our integration with Workday. As soon as somebody was onboarded, which was 2 weeks ahead of actually coming on board, it would kick in, start spawning processes, and we would give them birthright applications, right? The birthright applications that you need, timesheets, access to the typical tools. We were just spawning that, and that was okay. But even after onboarding, there were specific roles that required specific access to certain applications, and that application access was also in groups, in certain groups. Hardware workspace items were shipped to the same location, and that was something that was in a group. There were related software that we found that was in a common group. And there were other things from the business like NDA or request for document review, etc., that we had internally. Those were in groups. So all these bundling was required in various places in the application. However, as we were trying to analyze it, and we were trying to do this really quickly because of the transformation and the other deadlines that we had, we couldn't get the bundling defined, in a way that we said, okay, this is the bundle and this is what we're going to do for this persona. And in the meanwhile, something would change in the organization. And the bundle that we assumed would now cause a kind of dissonance, saying, oh, for this case, it's not true. There's an exception here. And we were spending a lot of time in that analysis. So that is something that we also observed, that the bundling could not be really defined to a fine-grained level. So we had to kind of provide for that. Another thing that we found was that low dollar value items and high dollar value items, the approvals were treated same. Oh, you send it to the manager and the manager approves and the next level manager approves and everybody still approves it and there's no rejections, but everywhere it waits 2 days here and 2 days there and it causes all this kind of consternation. And we said, okay, can we avoid some of that, can we just auto approve and things like that we discussed. But the internal audit team said, oh, no, we need to have record of the approval that some manager has actually approved this, such as application access, because you want to do provision and then you want to deprovision, and the independent external auditors would come in because it was healthcare and certain systems, who saw the data, who couldn't see the data, those kind of things they need to connect. So this is kind of the problem statement that we were arriving at. So,
Arun?
Yes.
I got a couple people on here that say they've stopped using a lot of approvals because they weren't being used correctly.
Can you elaborate, please?
Yes. So Josh, you were one of them, and then Kevin. What do you guys mean they weren't being used correctly? They were just.
So in our experience, we would trigger a notification that goes to the requester's manager, and they would essentially just auto approve. They see the approval email coming through and just bypass it that way. A way that
Didn't
we're
care what it
trying to
was.
start correct. Yeah, exactly. A way
The
that we're
narrator.
trying to correct that today is more of a role-based provisioning. So we've been working with our clinical teams, basically building out the predetermined set of tasks based on their position. So that way our audit team knows that it's going to bypass an approval. They know that 100% of the time it's going to be requested by this specific team, and there's no question on the accesses whatsoever.
Okay, right. So, and then that's one approach, and I'm going to discuss about the approach that we took. Okay, just in a couple of minutes here, if you'll give me a chance. There was some other comment. I don't want to miss out on the other comment. Somebody else also had a comment.
Yeah, Mitch had a good one here that a lot of people aren't familiar with about OCM.
Right.
Or non-IT people. When you start, I guess you're talking about requests specifically when you start getting non-IT requests in the catalog, Mitch, right?
Yeah, John. I mean, our IT folks, our change managers especially, are really used to the approval process, go in there, reject, approve, ask questions. But when we're talking about non-IT, like we have senior business officers, which are basically in charge of the budgets for departments, they get a notification from ServiceNow, but without training and education on how to use ServiceNow to either ask questions of the requester or approve or deny, it just often goes unnoticed, and that really leads to a lagging of the approval itself. And so they wind up sending an email saying, yeah, I approve. So it does require OCM and training. And of course, approver license, right? The department has to be willing to pay for the approver license.
So, yeah, so a good point, Mitch. And the way I've organized this presentation is I've set up this problem statement. I'll talk about the architecture, and towards the end, I will talk about the user experience. And
no, it's great. I heard you kind of alluding to that, so that's going to be great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And that's good discussion. And by the way, I will not be discussing anything about licensing. I try to stay out of all the licensing stuff. Even professionally in my role, we are pre-sales folks and solution folks, so we leave that to the account teams. So, but I think it's a point is well taken that you have to kind of consider the licensing needs as well, right? So, this being the scenario, I'm going to talk about the approach, the components that kind of played key roles in the solution, and then kind of give you a high level on how we did it. And I know we have until 12:30, so I want to be able to go through some of these steps quickly here, but I want to give it the due respect, right? So here's what we did. So just coming to the point that was just being made, we said that specific items were identified for automatic approval, like application access, items with the purchase value less than $500. So we had to go to purchasing, we had to go to the business process part of it and get approval from those areas in the organization saying that we could do this, because technically it was possible. But how did we do automated approval? We said we'll send a notification to the approver that the item was approved with the link for rejection in the notification should the approver choose to reject. So this was like an optimistic automatic approval, right? Saying that most of the scenarios where the item is coming in, we are going to automatically approve it, but we will store an approval record for audit purposes. So this is how we kind of were trying to be compliant at the same time, not cause any bottlenecks in the process. Does this answer some of the points that were brought up earlier? I think Josh brought up the point where, you know, their approach was slightly different, where they got the process approved, whereas we kind of maintained the records. That's the slight difference. Josh, just because you brought that point, want to see if I'm connecting with your the way you guys handle versus how this is being handled.
This is a great alternative because it appeases our audit team with knowing that there is some sort of approval record associated to the record itself, but also give that flexibility if you set it for like 24 hours after the request is submitted or whatever it might be, that the manager can reject it.
Yeah, right. So that kind of, you know, we were trying to take the two different competing parts of the problem and try to kind of solve for both. And this is how kind of we came up with this thing. So, so one of the desired outcomes that we got from this was to reduce the approval bottlenecks. We complied with auditing requirements while still providing options to reject, and until a certain point, right? I mean, after a certain point, you cannot reject it, then you got to go through cancel and everything else. The other thing we did, which I didn't put on the slide here, is that we also decided that, you know, there was really only one approval that happens in most of the scenarios. It's not like approval 1, approval 2, and this was a kind of a discussion with leadership saying that why are we first going into an approval, and then when it times out, when it breaches that level of approval SLA, we are then escalating it, and then somebody else has to take that on. And, you know, and then there's this whole escalation path of approvals. We said, we don't want to deal with any of that. There's only going to be one approval level. And after that, it kind of escalates right up to the very high levels. So it also kind of creates a organizational kind of, why aren't these things being approved? And a VP level says, you know, why is it coming to me? Why aren't you guys approving it? So we created kind of a little bit of a conflict there and a little disruption. But it changed behavior. So that was kind of, this is more on the organizational dynamics part of it. But we used that to make things kind of go faster. Remember, we were in an exponential IT environment. So we really wanted to get going quickly on all of these different things, right? Okay, so so next thing we said we'll have to make it a metadata-driven approach to the whole flow. And that's where we kind of set up a metadata model, in which we said we'll have standard flows, and the catalog item will be associated with one of the standard flows, and we will have approval attributes that we will know for that item as metadata. And then the tasks that it goes through, because we know there's standard patterns, we'll associate the catalog item and the task, and there'll be like a task type and the order in which it has to be done. And we also went through to the task text. So this is kind of a table structure, but I'm going to show more of the form and how it would look like. So you had a catalog item, let's say iPad Pro, and there's a flow name called standard metadata driven flow. I made these things specifically for this presentation to kind of communicate this whole approach. You can have any name. I've just went a little too Captain Obvious on that one. But standard metadata driven flow, and there's a record in that table. You have the approval details saying, is there an approval required, or there's no supervisor approval required, or the initial approval is by user or group or field or script, and various such things, options that be stored in the metadata table. So that's kind of the level one. And I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to pause after I explain these tables and open it out for questions if you need to get deeper into any of these table structure and the relationships, etc. And then we said catalog task defined for that item. We're going to say there's an order in which it is executed, there's a type of task, and there's an assignment group, and there's task test that is used inside the task. So these were the kind of two main tables that were associated with the catalog item that we were mapping. Any questions on what we are trying to do here? If not, let me go one step further and keep interrupting me. There's no issue. I just kind of, since I was presenting a new kind of a table structure, etc., I want to kind of pause there. So what this allowed us to do was it allowed the approval and fulfiller groups to be stored outside the flow. So the flows themselves did not have specific approval groups or assignment groups, inside the flow. It allowed for the delegation of changes to the domain business unit that owned the item or service. What I mean by that is, if there's a business unit that manages a certain set of items because it's something that they use and they provide, and on the back end, they are the fulfillers. And there are some changes that happen in their tasks or in their groups and things like that. That form that I showed you, you could give access to that form to those people for those items, and they could come and make changes. So that did not require any change in flows. And the testing was really not more than trying it out once, because you're not changing any part of the process, and it's executing, and only the next time the flow is invoked is when you're going to see the changes. Existing ones are going to go through to completion. So that's how we kind of try to abstract out the item and the underlying standard flow with the associated groups and tasks that were being used. I'll go one more step and talk about the flows and show how the flows use the table, right? Again, at a high level. So the typical request pattern, we talked about request, approval, fulfillment, and close, right? And so we said we'll have standard stages for all of these things. No matter which flow it is, they'll all follow a standard set of stages. So again, giving the user that consistency on how they would see a flow go through for a request that they made, right? And initially, here's where we started. We said we're going to have one flow per pattern, right? We said, oh, one request, one approval, sorry, one request, one approval, one task, close. One request, one approval, two tasks, close. And each one of them would have a specific flow. We associate the request item with a standard flow type, and each flow has predetermined approval and task steps, and only the groups are dynamic. What that meant is, in the flow, we actually mapped out separate flows which had one approval, task one, close. One approval, two tasks, close, and only the groups were dynamic. So we were using groups for approval and tasks, but those were dynamic and those were read from that table. So with that, what we had was we ran into 10 or 12 workflows or different flows where they were addressing the patterns, and the table actually had task columns separately. And the functions within the flow would look up the assignment groups and look up the predetermined tasks, no subflows. And this approach, although we started with this, we soon realized that there were limitations to this one. I'm saying that this works, but it was kind of our needs started to look like they were more than what this would help with us, right? Help us with. So the flows and patterns were fixed. The tasks were always serial. Scripting tasks were not supported, and it was not flexible or modular enough for expansion unless we change the metadata table, and then that defeats the purpose, right? I mean, we started with the metadata table saying that gives us the flexibility, and we can do many things with standard flows, and it suddenly started kind of defeating our hypothesis, saying, oh, we'll have to change the table if you have more tasks or more approvals, and that kind of was going against the grain of our initial philosophy. So what we do is we went kind of one step further, and we said one flow for all standard patterns, one flow not for all requests, but for the standard patterns that we knew of. But we also knew that we could have more, and we should do that without having to change the metadata table. So similar to the previous approach, we said associate the request item with a single standard flow. Each flow has dynamic approval and task steps. So this was the slight difference you're saying. So what we are doing here is said, not only are we going to have the one flow, but the tasks themselves are not predetermined, which means it's not like, up to 5 tasks or up to 6 tasks. We said we could have any number of tasks, and they could be also run, parallelly instead of only serially. And the other thing we also said is that, hey, sometimes we need to run scripts, and we should be able to support that. So those are all the things that we were able to support in this more parent-child way, where we said there is a parent table, which is for the flow and catalog item association with the approval details, and a child table, which would have the tasks, and it could have any number of tasks, and it could have different types of tasks, and still keeping the stages across all flows. But now we started using subflows. I'm going to pause here to see if I'm saying something complex or something that I'm not able to communicate, or if everything is kind of getting across from the way I'm explaining this.
Yeah, Jane Vivian had one question. I don't know if you want to come off mute. I don't know if Arun answered that since you posted it, or if it's still an open question. Okay, I guess she doesn't want to come off mute. So she says, so how are you going to manage a new joiner who requires a laptop bag, a gold software build, plus 5 specific software titles for their job role?
All right, so I'll just come to that. Thank you for that question, Jane. I have the other component that I've also identified as enabling catalog features, and that's how we kind of went about that approach. And I'm sure that is one approach. There are other approaches as well, like somebody else mentioned, where they defined a persona-based or role-based bundling of catalog items. But I will get to that in a minute. I just want to kind of get through the standard flows and then move into the next one. So any questions on the standard flows so far? But I will definitely address Jane's question after that.
Thanks, Arun.
I do have a question. So just to clarify, the standard workflows, those could vary, and also the subflows, they could vary based on each individual catalog item?
Say that last part again?
Yes, can those vary based on each, so the flows and the subflows, can those vary based on each individual catalog item that you may have out there?
Yes. Yeah, so kind of to explain that, let me kind of give you how this thing would work conceptually, right? I'm not going to show code because that distracts us from understanding the actual concept here, right? So the request comes in, and the first thing you do is like you prepare, you go to the standard flow metadata table and get some of the details that you need to move forward, and you set up Scratchpad and you do all those kind of things, and then you say, okay, now I'm going into approval state, and in the approval, I need a resolve approval subflow. What am I doing in the resolve approval subflow? I'm checking whether I need no approval required, or one of those kind of things that I checked off. And if it is so, then I will insert a record and do all those kind of things. If there's no supervisor approval required, I'll kind of say, okay, then what is the approval type I want? Is it the user type? Is it the group details? Is it a user? Sorry, I think it's just supposed to be say field. So you can actually have a field which specifies where is the approval information stored, and the script results, or a script that determines how that approval should happen. So that's the subflow for the approval. So again, it is not kind of hard-coded. It's not specified inside. You are always using scripts to go get that information. then we go into, once you've decided on the approval and that flow is kind of executing, you also look at the fulfillment part of it, where you don't know how many tasks there are going to be. And you say, okay, let me generate the task. I look at the details from the standard flow task table and I generate the tasks and use those tasks for the current instance of that item and its associated flow. And it may be one, it may be multiple, it actually may be even parallel, because we have this thing called order that can have two tasks with the number one. That means they're going to be in parallel, and then they'll come and join at 2. Those kind of things we kind of did inside that execution. But at a high level, what we're now doing is the approval is a subflow, the fulfillment is another subflow, and they're all dynamically deciding what needs to be done and executing on them till it gets to close and launching of the survey. Just kind of say every one of these things is standard, so we have surveys for everything, etc. Is this part, I mean, this is kind of the core of this entire approach. Using a standard metadata-driven flow, reaching out to the metadata tables, getting the specific details for that item in that instance of the flow, and executing that. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions.
I'll read 2 questions off for you that we had come in. There's I don't think there's any mention of using case or anything to get any additional, like, I don't believe case.
No,
I'll read the question out. Did you have to use case to create parallel? Just flipped over. Did you have to use case to create parallel sequential tasks? If yes, how did you take care of the same?
I don't think it is case. I mean, you're talking about the inside the actual flow, like switching between serial and parallel.
Yeah, I meant a catalog item might have a requirement to have parallel tasks.
Yeah.
And the other item might have the requirement to create the sequential tasks.
Right.
So dynamically, has that been taken care in your solution? That's
Yes, and I'm going to show you the table, and I'm going to ask Prashant if you want to address that question also in a little more detail. So let me show you the table that I was talking about here. So if you see this table in the child table for catalog tasks, you see the order. So if you see multiple tasks here, and you see 2 of the same order, that means that becomes a parallel task. And then, so let's say there are 3 tasks, and 2 of them have to be done parallelly, and then do this. So you'll have a task with order 1, another task with order 1, and a third task with order 2. So only after 1 and 1 are done will you go to 2. So that happens in code, actually.
understood. Answers my question. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. So that's how we kind of handle. So the earlier approach that I was talking, the initial approach did not handle all this. And we ran into kind of, as soon as we started that approach, we said, oh no, we have a problem, right? So that's why we kind of went into so there was not much of a lag between the approach 1 and approach 2. But I want to say that if you're really not having so many different options and it's a simplest kind of a environment, you can stay with the initial one. And if it's not too complex, right? But this one requires a little more scripting, a little more skill sets in your teams and things like that. So that's why, but this is where kind of the real benefits we got from the whole approach, right? So that is the initial.
So Arun,
yeah.
Can I just make one comment, Arun?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if somebody comes up with a new catalog flow requirements that I want 2 tasks in parallel, then 3 in serial, and then 4 in parallel, or any kind of combination of tasks can be handled in this one table, because the scripting code inside that workflow handles all these combinations properly. So essentially, any combination of task sequence after the approval is done can be handled by the same model. There is no code change, or there is no new code to be developed, just a configuration in the child table.
Thank you, Prashant. That I think explains. I hope the question answered. I mean,
Yep,
the answer
yep. You did.
And remember, before you go on, Richard asked, is this something you could implement using Item Designer? now catalog builder, right? Because this is mostly what you're talking about is mostly in the workflow, right? And the scripts that are in the workflows.
Yeah, so actually you can do it in Flow Designer as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but is that what was the question? Flow Designer, or was it?
Yeah, I think they mentioned specifically item designer, which is probably too high level for this. This is the next step underneath item designer, the flows.
Yeah, and even in Flow Designer, I mean, the main flow part of it, the subflow part of it is what you are really doing in Flow Designer. You still have to get into the scripting because you have made it dynamic. So you have to go and resolve some of the things to do this. But the investment that you make in the scripting is like, upfront, right? It's something that you do upfront, and then everything works off of that table. And I'm going to kind of briefly give you the steps on how you would go about adding a new catalog item, right? And you'll see the steps are going to become standard with that every time, right? So let me quickly identify kind of the scripts that you might have, right? You might have something to set up Scratchpad, to set up the persistence for the context of the flow. You'll have approval attributes, go get that, get the approver specifically.
I wonder if everybody knows what Scratchpad is.
Okay. All right. Let me kind of double click on that. So what happens is when you have a flow running, it is running in a context in that session. And when you want to pass variables and values or constants from one flow to the other, or want to use it in different actions within that same flow, instead of having to pass it back and forth, you can actually set up something called a Scratchpad, where you are persisting the values that you started in an earlier action or activity and use it later, and it's available throughout that session. And it is not something that's available across sessions. It is just within that instantiation of that flow. So it is available. So because we don't want to keep going back and reaching to the table, you get it once and you put it in the Scratchpad, and then you don't have to go back and read the table again. So it's a little bit for efficiency, and also to kind of do it once and use it many times, right? So
it's like a global variable.
Exactly, global variable, right?
Thanks.
And then get approval attributes, get the approver, inserting the auto approval record. These are all kind of scripts that you'll have. And then one for creating the catalog tasks dynamically, and another for getting assignment groups, right? I've just put the scripts here that support that kind of a conceptual approach that I was showing in that schematic, right? So with this, like Prashant mentioned, all different kind of requirements for tasks to be serial, to be parallel, to have different text inside of the tasks, so that the fulfiller gets the appropriate instructions, etc., is all managed in that metadata table. Okay, and this is the answer I wanted to I was saving for, I think it was Jane who asked, how are you going to now combine different things for a user when they want a set of applications, access, and some software and some workspace needs that they have. So we used AutoGuides extensively. And for those that are not familiar with AutoGuides, AutoGuides are a catalog, service catalog feature or functionality that allows multiple items to be requested at the same time in one interface by the end user. And it gives a better user experience because there are certain things that you enter for multiple requests, like the demographics, name, address, department, cost center, things like that. You enter that, and then you ask for item 1, item 2, item 3. If you don't have an order guide, each of them becomes a separate request. But if you do have an order guide, all of them are in the same request. And when you submit it, it spawns off each of them as a separate flow, which you can still track separately, but is available as a bundle, but you have not really tied them all together in a relationship inside the database. You have done it only while using it. And the reason I say that is, I think once upon a time, if some of you have been around long, in the ServiceNow space. I say I am a Berlin, so so I've been around since Berlin, and I've seen some of these things. There used to be a concept called bundle, which is I don't think we push forward anymore. But the bundle used to have that definition where you could bundle things together. And there are ways to actually categorize and bring items together to use inside the request process. But the way we did the order guide, you could actually assemble your own bundle for your current user and then use the requested for attribute so that you're doing it on behalf of another user and spawning that off to multiple requests. Jane, I want to come back to you to see if I've answered that question. I mean, I don't know that she's off.
Yes, she said yes in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the thing that I wanted to also bring here is the order guide. We talk about this fact that you want to bundle it, and the organization is not really letting you do it because you now have changes happening so much that you're not able to iron out what that specific bundle definition is. So what we did is we also allowed users to copy prior requests so that they could take the request and modify it and do it, right? So those are some of the other usability things. I know I'm going to run out of time here quickly, so let me hit a couple of the other points. Variable sets, this is the other enabling catalog functionality, which from an implementation perspective was a huge time saver because we could use the variable sets and reuse them in multiple order guides or in even requests, right? Catalog item configuration. So how would you go about when a new catalog item comes? You create the catalog item and then you use reusable variable sets, add to order guide if applicable, create item specific variables, associate standard metadata driven flow, and then you populate the table with all the other approval attributes as well as the tasks rows and with order and attributes. So now with these steps, you're ready to test, right? You've just entered data. You've not done any other configuration other than entered data and created some variables, and then you can test the flow. This is how we could really increase the velocity of what we were doing. And I'm going to give you quick migration notes on. We had one agile team doing this, one platform owner, one architect, 2 developers, 1 business analyst. Unit and acceptance testing were by users in specific domains. This is where we started the organizational change management. The users saw what was going to come to them long before we kind of released, right? And the team had concurrent responsibilities, so we needed everybody on board, and we were able to release at approximately 40 catalog items, and we were doing monthly. We had bi-weekly sprints, but we had monthly releases. So every month we were putting out 40 catalog items. And one of the main reasons we could do this was all that I've been saying so far. The standard flows, we knew the patterns, creating the item, reusing variable sets, order guides. So suddenly you had an application access order guide. There was only one application access order guide, but it started getting more and more items available in that order guide. So we didn't have to go through a whole new organizational change management or enablement because it was only drop downs were increasing, and we did a communication plan where we would say, okay, in this release, you've got all these things now coming new in these order guides. So that's kind of a way we were handling that velocity of implementation. So one of the other things that happened, and this is not necessarily the architecture or the solution part of it, but more on the OCM part of it. We had 2 platforms, and we were migrating services from one to the other, but we populated both with all the items, but they were cross-linked. So if it was not implemented yet, you would do it in the old platform. If it was already implemented, it would take you to the ServiceNow platform. Similarly, if you went to the ServiceNow platform and it was not yet implemented, it would take you back to the original one. So we didn't put the onus on the user to determine where they needed to go. So that's how we kind of managed that. Other things we did was, although we had categories for kind of managing the maintenance of the items, we really said search is the way you should go about it. And we use the meta tag for each item extensively. So you had the old names as meta tags in the new items. So you could search and you could find what you're looking for. And you use user criteria to winnow down the list of things that were being presented. I've said a lot here. I'm going to pause and see if you got any other.
I think Greg has been waiting for a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, Aaron. I'm going to try and make this pertinent to what we're talking about here, because we are talking about standardization of, workflows really across catalog items.
Yeah.
Basically, HJF, who I represent, we are, I guess, mature with everything that you've detailed here. We pretty much are following this path, and it has worked out pretty well for us. My question is really, do you or anybody here in the group have a way to account for when a request, the details of the request change? Right now, when we went live in 2018, we used variables. And the variables are very static, and when a quantity or what have you changes and what have you, we don't have a way of updating those variables, and we don't have a dynamic interface in the back end to be able to account for when the dependent fields when some values change. And I'm just kind of curious, if it's not pertinent to what we're talking about, I get it, but since we are talking about standardization, has anybody here, or Aaron, have a solution for, kind of standardizing that across catalog items?
I think I need to also understand your question a little deeper, but I think what you're saying is, after you have defined the item and after it's been instantiated, if something changes, is that the question?
Correct.
Okay, so the workflow is already in context and executing, and that's when something changes?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that can get a little hairy, because now it depends on the stage at which your execution is, and if it has not gone past the stage or reached that stage, that may be one thing, but still you're now trying to get into the context, right?
Yeah, I mean, if something changes before approval or after approval, it could potentially have a different workflow, right?
Yeah, but I would ask some other follow-up questions before, kind of thinking about a solution is, how often does this happen?
Very often, unfortunately. We followed the self-service model, very heavily when we went live, but that kind of over time has kind of backfired for certain items, because we're finding that users don't really detail things very well, especially if you give them a comments field. They might just get a free lunch and skip a bunch of stuff, and this also has downhill effects with our reporting. Bad data, bad reporting. So
I think there are a couple of ways, I think, just out of the top of the head, solution that I can think about, but I think we can take it offline, and I'm willing to kind of engage, and let's have some email.
Sure.
Right? But I think the way you want to do that is you want to do it in the process, because what's happened is you've started a flow and something has changed. So the way I would say is that we give them functionality to restart it. So instead of saying cancel, you give them a restart functionality, and behind the scenes, you terminate the prior flow, start a new one with the same set of values, and allow them to change it, and then go forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the devil's in the details there.
Yes. But I recently was talking to a customer who had that need, and we made them do that, because changing values mid-context messes up a lot of things, because now you are in a transient stage, right? So that's where so which is why the cleaner one is almost like a restart, but don't let them feel that they have to go all over again. Let them restart and bring them back with the ability to change that. So let's take it offline. It's interesting. It is interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to hijack this. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I have John, couple of minutes to close out, or do you want to close out?
No, go ahead and close out because we're a little over now. So
Yeah. Yeah, so I only want to kind of point out some of these things, and this is a whole presentation in itself about how we went about some of these things, because prior to this thing, we did not have a specific IT service portal, and we did that. We did a focus group, and we did design thinking sessions to design the portal. We went through notifications and mobile and dashboards, etc. And we got into a place where everything has to be contextual, persona aware, personalized, branded, and consistent. What I mean by that is, I'll use the notifications as an example. I think somebody brought up this thing, unless you have OCM, there are business users who will never look at it. And this is what we did. We said we limit the number of notifications and to avoid notification overload. And we branded everything. It just doesn't come from ServiceNow. It came from the name of our portal. And every message that came from the service catalog or the portal had the standard look and feel, and it was very conversational, saying, why am I getting this message? What do I need to do? And no action required. All those things, we did that. And it was also, consistent in its look and feel, so that they knew where to look for what kind of information on the notification. And it was device form factor aware, because a lot of times you get messages on your phone. You and I do get this, and it says action required, but there are 6 action required. I don't know which one is what, and should I open it now or later? So we try to put the significant information up front and started shortening the message text so that you drew attention where it was important and things like that, right? So that's all part of the OCM, including the communication plan. So in closing, I would say, some of the things that we look at: governance, execution, adoption. Adoption is really the key. And for adoption, we have to do organizational change management. I know I've gone over. I hope this has been informative. We ran out of time for pure question and answer sessions. I hope you have been asking questions when needed. And thank you to all of you to spend your time with us today here. And thank you, John, for this opportunity. Back to you, John.
Appreciate it very much, Arun. Great presentation. Lots of good interaction. It's exactly what we want here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Prashant, for your contribution.
Thank you.